Good wishes to all of you. Medieval India from Satish Chandra sir, Chapter 2, Northern India, Age of the Three Empires 800 to 1000, audiobook. After the decline of Harsha's empire in the 7th century, a number of large states arose in North India. The Deccan and South India, unlike the Gupta and Harsha's empire in North India, none of the other kingdoms in North India were able to bring the entire Ganga valley under its control. The Ganga Valley, which its population and other resources was the basis on which the Gupta rulers and Harsha had been able to extend their control over Gujarat, which with its rich seaports and manufactures was important for overseas trade. Malwa and Rajasthan were the essential links between the Ganga Valley and Gujarat. This defined the geographical limits of an empire in North India. In South India, the Cholas were able to bring the Krishna, Godavari, and Kaveri deltas under their control. This was the basis of their supremacy in South India. Large states arose in North India and the Deccan between Anno Domini 750 and 1000. These were the Pala Empire, which dominated eastern India till the middle of the 9th century, the Pratihara Empire, which dominated western India and the upper Gangatic Valley till the middle of the 10th century, and the Rashtrakuta Empire, which dominated the Deccan and also controlled territories in North and South India at various times. Each of these empires, although they fought among themselves, provided stable conditions of life over large areas, extended agriculture, built ponds and canals, and gave patronage to arts and letters, including temples. Of the three, the Rashtrakuta Empire lasted the longest. It was not only the most powerful empire of the time, but also acted as a bridge between North and South India in economic as well as in cultural matters. The struggle for domination in North India, the Palas. The period following the death of Harsha was a period of political confusion, so for some time Lalitaditya, the ruler of Kashmir, brought the Punjab under his control and even controlled Kanuj, which since the days of Harsha was considered the symbol of the sovereignty of North India, a position which Delhi was to acquire later. Control of Kanuj also implied control of the upper Gangatic Valley and its rich resources in trade and agriculture. Lalitaditya even invaded Bengal or Ghat and killed its reasoning king, but his power waned with the rise of the Palas and the Gujara Pratiharas. The Palas and the Pratiharas clashed with each other for control of the area extending from Banaras to South Bihar, which again had rich resources and well developed imperial traditions. The Pratiharas also clashed with the Rashtrakutas of the Deccan. The Pala Empire was founded by Gopala, probably in Anno Domini 750, when he was elected king by the notable men of the area to end the anarchy prevailing there. Gopala was not born in a high, much less a royal family, his father probably being a soldier. He unified Bengal under his control and even brought Magadha Bihar under his control. Gopala was succeeded in Anno Domini 770 by his son Dharmapala, who ruled till Anno Domini 810. His reign was marked by a tripartite struggle between the Palas, the Pratiharas, and the Rashtrakutas for the control of Kannauj and North India. The Pratihara ruler advanced upon Gaud Bengal, but before a decision could be taken, he was defeated by the Rashtrakuta ruler, Dhruva, and was forced to seek refuge in the deserts of Rajasthan. Dhruva then returned to the Deccan. This left the field free from Dharmapala, who occupied Kanunj and held a grand darbar attended by vassal rulers from Punjab, eastern Rajasthan, etc. We are told that the rule of Dharmapala extended up to the furthest limit of India in the northwest and perhaps included Malwa and Berar. Apparently, this implied that the rulers of these areas accepted the sovereignty of Dharmapala. The triumphal career of Dharmapala may be placed between Anno Domini 790 and 800. Dharmapala could not, however, consolidate his power in North India. The Pratihara power revived under Nagabhatta to Dharmapala fell back but was defeated near Mongri. Bihar and modern East Uttar Pradesh remained a bone of conten- contention between the Palas and the Pratiharas. However, Bihar, in addition to Bengal, remained under the control of the Palas for most of the time. Failure in the north compelled the Pala rulers to turn their energies into other directions. Devapala, the son of Dharmapala, who succeeded to the throne in Anadomini 810 and ruled for 40 years, extended his control over Pragjyotishpur, Assam, and parts of Orissa. Probably a part of modern Nepal was also brought under Pala suzerainty. Thus, for about 100 years, from the middle of the 8th to the middle of the 9th century, the Pala rulers dominated eastern India. For some time, their control extended up to Varanasi. Their power is assisted to by an Arab merchant, Suleiman, who visited India in the middle of the 9th century and write an account of it. He calls the Pala kingdom Ruhma or Darba, short for Dharmapala, and says that the Pala ruler was at war with his neighbors, the Pratiharas and the Rashtrakutas, but his troops were more numerous than his adversaries. He tells us that it was customary for the Pala king to be accompanied by a force of 50,000 elephants and that 10,000 to 15,000 men in his army were employed in fulling and washing clothes. Even if these figures may be exaggerated, we can assume that the Palas had a large military force at their disposal, but we do not know whether they had a large standing army or whether their forces consisted largely of feudal levies. Information about the Palas is also provided to us by Tibetan chronicles, although these were written in the 17th century. According to this, the Pala rulers were great patrons of Buddhist learning and religion. The Nalanda University, which had been famous all over the eastern world, was revived by Dharmapala, and 200 villages were set apart for meeting its expenses. He also founded the Vikramasila University, which became second only to Nalanda in fame. It was located on the top of a hill on the banks of the Ganga in Magda. Amidst pleasant surroundings, the Palas built many viharas in which a large number of Buddhist monks lived. The Pala rulers also had close cultural relations with Tibet. The noted Buddhist scholars Santarakshita and Diphankara, called Atisa, were invented to Tibet, and they introduced a new form of Buddhism there. As a result, many Tibetan Buddhists flocked to the universities of Nalanda and Vikramashila for study. Although the Palas were supporters of Buddhism, they also extended their patronage to Shaivism and Vaishnavism. They gave grants to large numbers of Brahmanas from North India who flocked to Bengal. Their settlement helped in the extension of cultivation in the area and the transformation of many pastoralists and food gatherers who settled down to cultivation. The growing prosperity of Bengal helped in extending trade and cultural contacts with countries of Southeast Asia, Burma, Malaya, Java, Sumatra, etc. The trade with Southeast Asia was very profitable and added greatly to the prosperity of the Pala Empire and led to the incursion of gold and silver from these countries into Bengal. The powerful Sailendra dynasty, which was Buddhist in faith and which ruled over Malaya, Java, Sumatra, and the neighboring islands, sent many ambassadors to the Pala court and sought permission to build a monastery at Nalanda and also requested the Pala ruler Devapala to endow 5 villages for its upkeep. The request was granted and bears a testimony to the close relations between the two empires. The Pratiharas who ruled over Kanuj for a long time, are also called Gujara Pratiharas. Most scholars believed that they originated from the Gujaras, who were pastoralists and fighters like the Jats. The Pratiharas established a series of principalities in central and eastern Rajasthan. They clashed with the Rashtrakutas for the control of Malwa and Gujarat. and later for Kanauns, which implied control of the upper Ganga valley. The Pratiharas, who first had their capital at Binmal, gained prominence under Nagabhatta I, who offered a stout resistance to the Arab rulers of Sindh who were trying to encroach on Rajasthan, Gujarat, the Punjab, etc. The Arabs made a big thrust towards Gujarat but were decisively defeated by the Chalukyan ruler of Gujarat in 738. Although small Arab incursions continued, the Arabs ceased to be a threat thereafter. The efforts of the early Pratihara rulers to extend their control over the upper Ganga valley and Malwa were defeated by the Rashtrakuta rulers Dhruva and Gopal III in 790 and again in 806 to 7. The Rashtrakutas defeated the Pratiharas and then withdrew to the Deccan, leaving the field free for the Palas. Perhaps the main interest of the Rashtrakutas was the domination of Malwa and Gujarat, the real founder of the Pratihara Empire and the greatest ruler of the dynasty was Bhoja. We do not know much about the early life of Bhoja or when he ascended the throne. He rebuilt the empire and by about Anno Domini 836 had recovered Kannauj, which remained the capital of the Pratihara Empire for almost a century. Bhoja tried to extend his sway in the east, but he was defeated and checkmated by the Pala ruler, Devapala. He then turned towards central India and the Deccan and Gujarat. This led to a revival of the struggle with the Rashtrakutas. In a sanguinary battle on the banks of the Narmada, Bhoja was able to retain his control over considerable parts of Malwa and some parts of Gujarat, but he could progress no further in the Deccan. Hence, he turned his attention to the north again. According to an inscription, his territories extended to the western inside of the river Sutlej. Arab travelers tells us that the Pratihara rulers had the best cavalry in India. Import of horses from Central Asia and Arabia was an important item of Indians trade at that time. Following the death of Devapala and the weakening of the Pala Empire, Bhoja also extended his empire in the east. The name of Bhoja is famous in legends. Perhaps the adventures of the Bhoja in the early part of his life, his gradual reconquest of his lost empire, and his final recovery of Kannauj struck the imagination of his contemporaries. Bhoja was a devotee of Vishnu and adopted the title of Adivaraha, which has been found inscribed in some of his coins. He is sometimes called Mihir Bhoja to distinguish his from Bhoja Parampara of Ujjain, who ruled a little later. Bhoja probably died in about 885. He was succeeded by his son Mahendrapala I. Mahendrapala, who ruled till about 908 to 9, maintained the empire of Bhoja and extended it over Magadha and North Bengal. His inscriptions have also been found in Kathiawar, East Punjab, and Awadh. Mahendrapal fought a battle with the king of Kashmir but had to yield to him some of the territories in the Punjab won by Bhoja. The Pratiharas thus dominated North India for over 100 years from the early 9th to the middle of the 10th century. Al Masudi, a native of Baghdad who visited Gujarat in 915 to 16, testifies to the great power and prestige of the Prathara rulers and the vastness of their empire. He calls the Gujara Prathara kingdom all this a corrupt form of Gujarat and the king Baura, probably a mispronunciation of Adivaraha, the title used by Bhoja, although Bhoja had died by that time. Al Masudi says that the empire of Juzar had 180,000 villages, cities, and rural areas and was about 2000 kilometers in length and 2000 kilometers in breadth. The king's army had four divisions, each consisting of 7 lakh to 9 lakh men, with the army of the north he fights against the ruler of Multan and other Muslims who align themselves with him. The army of the south fought against the Rashtrakutas and that of the east against the Palas. He had only 2,000 elephants trained for war, but the best cavalry of any king in the country. The Pratiharas were patrons of learning and literature. The great Sanskrit poet and dramatist Rajashekhar lived at the court of Mahipala, a grandson of Bhoja. The Pratihara also embellished Kannauj with many fine buildings and temples. During the 8th and 9th centuries, many Indian scholars went with embassies to the court of the Caliph at Baghdad. These scholars introduced Indian sciences, especially mathematics, algebra, and medicine to the Arab world. We do not know the names of the Indian kings who sent these embassies. The Pratharas were well known for their hostility to the Arab rulers of Sindh. Despite this, it seems that the movement of scholars and goods between India and West Asia continued even during this period. Between 915 and 918, the Rashtrakuta king Indra III again attacked Kannauj and devastated the city. This weakened the Pratihara Empire and Gujarat probably passed into the hands of the Rashtrakutas. For Al Masudi tells us that the Pratihara Empire had no access to the sea. The loss of Gujarat, which was the hub of the overseas trade and the main outlet for North Indian goods to West Asian countries, was another blow to the Pratiharas. Another Rashtrakuta ruler, Krishna III, invaded North India in about 963 and defeated the Pratihara ruler. This was followed by the rapid dissolution of the Pratihara Empire. The Rashtrakutas. While the Palas and the Pratiharas were ruling over North India, the Deccan was being ruled by the Rashtrakutas, a remarkable dynasty which produced a long line of warriors and able administrators. The kingdom was founded by Dante Durga, who set up his capital at Manyaket or Malkad near modern Sholapur. The Rashtrakutas soon dominated the entire area of northern Maharashtra. They also engaged with the Pratiharas for the overlordship of Gujarat and Malwa. As we have seen above, although their raids did not result in the extension of the Rashtrakuta Empire to the Ganga Valley, they brought rich plunder and added to the fame of the Rashtrakutas. The Rashtrakutas also fought constantly against the eastern Chalukyas of Vengi in modern Andhra Pradesh and in the south against the Pallavas of Kanchi and the Pandyas of Madurai. Probably the greatest Rashtrakuta rulers were Govind III, 793 to 814, and Amogh Varsha 814 to 878 after a successful expedition against Nagapata of Kannauj and the annexation of Malwa. Govind III turned to the south. We are told in an inscription that Govind terrified the Kerala, Pandya, and the Chola kings and caused the Pallavas to wither. The Ganga of Karnataka, who became dissatisfied through baseness, were bound down with fetters and met with death. The king of Lanka and his ministers, who had been negligent of their own interests, were captured and brought over as prisoners to Halapur. Two statues of the Lord of Lanka were carried to Manyaket and installed like pillars of victory in front of a Shiva temple. Amogh Varsha ruled for 64 years, but by temperament he preferred the pursuit of religion and literature to war. He was himself an author and is credited with writing the first Kannada book on poetics. He was a great builder and is said to have built the capital city, Manyaket, so as to excel the city of Indra. There were many rebellions in the far-flung Rashtrakuta Empire under Amogvarsha. These could be barely contained and began afresh after his death. His grandson Indra III, 915 to 927, re-established the empire. After the defeat of Mahipala and the sack of Kannauj in 915, Indra III was the most powerful rulers of his times. According to Al Masudi, who visited India at that time, the Rashtrakuta king Balhara or Vallabharaja was the greatest king of India, and most of the Indian rulers accepted his sovereignty and respected his envoys. He possessed large armies and innumerable elephants. Krishna III, 934 to 963, was the Last in a line of brilliant rulers, he was engaged in a struggle against the Parmaras of Malwa and the eastern Chalukyas of Vengi. He also launched a campaign against the Chola ruler of Tanjore, who had supplanted the Pallavas of Kanchi. Krishna III defeated the Chola king Paramtaka 1949 and annexed the northern part of the Chola Empire. He then proceeded on to Rameshwaram and set up a pillar of victory there and built him temple after his death. All his opponents united against his successor. The Rashtrakuta capital, Malkad, was sacked and burnt in 972. This marked the end of the Rashtrakuta Empire. The Rashtrakuta rule in the Deccan thus lasted for almost 200 years till the end of the 10th century. The Rashtrakuta rulers were tolerant in their religious views and patronized not only Shaivism and Vaishnavism but Jainism as well. The famous rock cut temple of Shiva at Ellora was built by one of the Rashtrakuta kings, Krishna I, in the 9th century. His successor, Amogavarsha, is said to have been a Jain, but he also patronized of other faiths. The Rashtrakutas allowed Muslim traders to settle and permitted Islam to be preached in their dominance. We are told that the Muslims had their own headmen and had large mosques for their daily prayers in many of the coastal towns in the Rashtrakuta Empire. This tolerant policy helped to promote foreign trade, which enriched the Rashtrakutas. The Rashtrakutas kings were great patrons of arts and letters. In their courts, we find not only Sanskrit scholars but also poets and others who wrote in Prakrit and in the Apabhramsha, the so-called corrupt languages, which were the forerunners of the various modern Indian languages. The great Apabhramsa poet Swayambhu and his son probably lived at the Rashtrakuta court. Political ideas and organization. The system of administration in these empires was based on the ideas and practices of the Gupta Empire, Harsha's kingdom in the north, and the Chalukyas in the Deccan. As before, the monarch was the center of all affairs. He was the head of the administration as well as the commander in chief of the armed forces. He sat in a magnificent darbar. Squadrons of infantry and cavalry were stationed in the courtyard. Captured were elephants and horses were paraded before him. He was attended by royal chamberlains who regulated the coming and going of vassal chiefs, feudatories, ambassadors, and other high officials who regularly waited on the king. The king also dispensed justice. The court was not only a center of political affairs and justice, but cultural life as well. Dancing girls and skilled musicians attend the court. Women of the king's household also attended the darbar on festive occasions. In the Rashtrakuta Empire, according to Arab writers, women did not veil their faces. The king's position was generally hereditary. Thinkers of the time emphasized absolute loyalty and obedience to the king because of the insecurity of the times. Wars were frequent between kings and their vassals, while kings strove to maintain law and order within their kingdoms. Their arms rarely extended far enough. Vassal rulers and autonomous chiefs often limited the area of the direct administration of the king. Although the kings adopted high sounding titles such as Mahadiraja, Param, Bhattaraka, etc., and claimed to be Chakravartin or supreme of all Indian rulers, a contemporary writer, Medati, thinks that it was the right of an individual to bear arms in order to defend himself against thieves and assassins. He also thinks that it was right to oppose an unjust king, thus, the extreme view of royal rights and privileges, put forward mainly in the Puranas, was not accepted by all the thinkers. The rulers about succession were not rigidly fixed. The eldest son often succeeded, but there are many instances when the eldest son had to fight his younger brothers and sometimes lost to them. Thus, the Rashtrakuta rulers Dhruva and Govinda IV deposed their elder brothers. Sometimes rulers designated the eldest son or another favorite son as their Yuvaraja or successor. In that case, the Yuvaraja stayed at the capital and helped in the task of administration. Younger sons were sometimes appointed provincial governors. Princes were rarely appointed to government posts, but we do have an instance when a Rashtrakuta princess Chandra Bhalabhe, a daughter of Amog Varsha I, administered the Raichur dog for some time. Kings were generally advised by a number of ministers. The ministers were chosen by the king generally from leading families. Their position was often hereditary. Thus, in the case of the Pala kings, we hear that a Brahmana family supplied four successive chief ministers to Dharmapala and his successors. In such cases, the minister could become very powerful. Although we hear of a number of departments of the central government, we do not know how many of them there were and how they worked. From epigraphic and literary records, it appears that in almost every kingdom there was a minister of correspondence, which included foreign affairs, a revenue minister, treasurer, chief of the armed forces, senapati, chief justice, and purohita. More than one post could be combined in the one person, and perhaps one of the ministers was considered the others. All the ministers except the purohita were accepted to lead military campaigns as well when called upon to do so. We also hear of officials of the royal household Antapur. Since the king was the fountainhead of all power, some of the officers of the household became very powerful. The armed forces were very important for the maintenance and expansion of the empire. We have already cited evidence from Arab travelers that the Pala, Pratihara, and Rashtrakuta kings had large and well organized infantry and cavalry, and a large number of war elephants. Elephants were supposed to be elements of strength and were greatly prized. The largest number of elephants was maintained by the Pala kings. Large numbers of horses were imported both by Rashtrakuta and Pratihara kings by sea from Arabia and West Asia, and overland from Khorasan, East Persia, and Central Asia. The Pratihara kings are believed to have had the finest cavalry in the country. There are no references to war chariots which had fallen out of use. Some of the kings, especially the Rashtrakutas, had a large number of forts. They were garrisoned by special troops and had their own independent commanders. The infantry consisted of regular and irregular troops and of levies provided by the vassal chiefs. The regular troops were often hereditary and sometimes drawn from different regions all over India. Thus, the Pala infantry consisted of soldiers from Malwa, Kasa, Assam, Latha, South Gujarat, and Karnataka. The Pala kings and perhaps the Rashtrakutas had their own navies, but we do not know much about their strength and organization. The empires consisted of area administered directly and areas ruled over by the vassal chiefs. The latter were autonomous as far as their internal affairs were concerned and had a general obligation of loyalty, paying a fixed tribute and supplying the quota of troops to the overlord. Sometimes a son of a vassal chief was required to stay in attendance to the overlord to guard against rebellion. The vassal chiefs were required to attend the darbar of the overlord on special occasions, and sometimes they were required to marry one of their daughters to the overlord or to one of his sons. But the vassal chiefs always aspired to be independent, and wars between them and the overland with the overlord were frequent. Thus, the Rashtrakutas had to fight constantly against the vassal chiefs of Vengi, Andhra, and Karnataka. The Pratiharas had to fight against the Paramparas of Malwa and the Chandelas of Bundelkhand. The directly administrated territories in the Pala and Pratihara empires were divided into Bhukti, provinces, and Mandala or Visaya districts. The governor of a province was called Uparika, and the head of a district, Visyapati. The Uparika was expected to collect land revenue and maintain law and order with the help of the army. The Visyapati was accepted to do the same within his jurisdiction. During the period, there was an increase in smaller chieftains called Samantas or Bhogapatis who dominated over the number of villages. The Visyapatis and the smaller chiefs tended to merge with each other, and later on, the word Samanta began to be used indiscriminately for both of them. In the Rashtrakuta kingdom, the directly administrated areas were divided into Rashtra provinces, Visaya and Bhukti. The head of Rashtra was called Rashtrapati and he performed the same functions as the Uparika did in the Pala and Pratihara empires. The Visaya was like a modern district and the Bhukti was a smaller unit. In the Pala and the Pratihara empires, the unit below the Vaishya was called Patala. The precise role of these smaller units is not known. It seems that their main purpose was the realization of land revenue and some attention to law and order. Apparently, all the officials were paid through grants of rent free land. This tended to blur the distinction between local officials and the hereditary chiefs and smaller vassals. Similarly, the Rashtrapati or governor sometimes enjoyed the status and title of a vassal king. Below these territorial divisions was the village. The village was the basic unit of administration. The village administration was carried on by the village headman and the village accountant, whose posts were generally hereditary. They were paid by grants of rent free lands. The headman was often helped in his duties by the village elders called Grama Mahajana or Grama Mahatara. In the Rashtrakuta kingdom, particularly in Karnataka, we are told that there were village committees to manage the local schools, tanks, temples, and roads. They could also receive money or property interest and manage them. These subcommittees worked in close cooperation with the headman and received a percentage of the revenue collection. Simple disputes were also decided by these committees. Towns had similar committees to which the heads of trade guilds were also associated. Law and order in the towns and in areas in their immediate vicinity was the responsibility of the Kostapala or Kotwal, a figure made familiar through many stories. An important feature of the period was the rise in the Deccan of hereditary revenue officers called Nad Gavandas or Desa Gramakutas. They appear to have discharged the same functions as the Deshmukhs and Deshpandes of later times in Maharashtra. This development, along with the Petri chieftainships in North India, which we have just mentioned, had an important bearing on society and politics. As the power of these hereditary elements grew, the village committees became weaker. The central ruler also found it difficult to assert his authority over them and to control them. This is what we mean when we say that the government was becoming federalized. Another point to bear in mind is the relationship of a state and religion during the time. Many of the rulers of that time were devout followers of Shiva or Vishnu, or they followed the teachings of Buddhism or Jainism. They made handsome donations to the Brahmas or the Buddhist viharas or the Jain temples, but generally they offered patronage to all the faiths and did not persecute anyone for his or her religious beliefs. Muslims were also welcomed and allowed to preach their faith by the Rashtrakuta kings. Normally, a king was not accepted to interfere with the customs or with the code of conduct prescribed by the law books called the Dharma Shastras, but he did have the general duty of protecting Brahmanas and maintaining the division of society into four states or varnas. The Purohita was accepted to guide the king in this matter, but it should not be thought that the Purohita interfered with state affairs or dominated the king. Medatithi, the foremost expounder of Dharmashastra in this period, says that the king's authority was derived both from the Dharmashastras, including the Vedas, and from Arthashastra or the science of polity. His public duty or Rajadharma was to be based on the Arthashastra, that is, on principles of politics. This really meant that politics and religion were in essence kept apart, religion being essentially a personal duty of the king. Thus, the kings were not dominated by the priests or by the sacred law expounded by them. Religion was, however, important for legitimating and strengthening the position of the rulers. Many of the rulers, therefore, built grand temples often at their capitals and gave handsome land grants for the maintenance of the temples and to the Brahmanas. Thank you.